Today, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said he wants to fight the invasive snake that's eating its way through the Everglades.
Florida's plan to unleash a new predator to hunt its invasive pythons was met with total disbelief. To put it mildly, people thought the state had lost its mind, but the real madness was what was happening unseen. The pythons weren't just eating everything, they had brought a microscopic parasite that was starting a new plague.
Now, scientists have discovered a new problem. The python actually carries a parasite that also destroys native wildlife.
The snake-dispatching creature they released wasn't just a desperate idea, it was the only piece left in a puzzle to restore balance. The truth wasn't just surprising, it was a biological bombshell that no one saw coming. The billion-dollar collapse. Long before the chaos, the Florida Everglades was a different world. It was a sprawling green ocean of sawgrass stretching to the horizon, a place nicknamed the River of Grass. This wasn't a stagnant swamp, it was a slow-moving river, 50 miles wide, flowing softly toward the sea. Here, wading birds gathered in clouds so thick they darkened the sky. Raccoons, opossums, and bobcats moved through the marshes with purpose. It was a perfectly balanced system, an ecological masterpiece worth an estimated $31.5 billion every single year. It was one of the last truly wild places on the continent, and no one could imagine that this balance was about to be shattered, not by a bang, but by a whisper. The story starts in 1992. Hurricane Andrew, a monster Category 5 storm, tore across South Florida. It flattened neighborhoods and ripped communities apart. In the confusion, a reptile breeding facility near Miami was destroyed. Amid the wreckage, a few exotic snakes, Burmese pythons, slipped away into the wetlands. Around the same time, pet owners, overwhelmed by their rapidly growing pets, began releasing them into the Everglades, thinking they were doing a kind thing. For years, nobody paid much attention. A few sightings here and there seemed harmless, but they weren't. You see, those few escapees found a paradise. The heat, the humidity, the endless water, and a buffet of animals that had no idea what a giant constrictor was. It was the perfect place to thrive. What started as a handful of lost pets became an invasion hiding in plain sight. Today, experts estimate that anywhere from 100,000 to over 300,000 Burmese pythons slither through South Florida. The wow factor here is their breeding. A single large female can lay a clutch of up to 100 eggs. Hidden in the dense undergrowth, they multiply at a rate that is simply impossible to track. And as the pythons multiplied, the Everglades began to fall silent. The numbers that came out of scientific studies were devastating. Raccoon populations in the deep Everglades dropped by 99.3%. Opossums fell by 98.9%. Bobcat sightings plummeted by 87.5%. Marsh rabbits, once a common sight, vanished completely in many areas. Even the white-tailed deer population fell by more than 90%. The thing nobody tells you is why these snakes are so unstoppable. First, their camouflage is perfect. Their mottled brown and tan pattern makes them ghosts in the sawgrass. You can be standing 5 feet from a 10-foot python and never see it. Second, they are apex predators from day one. They are born ready to hunt, and they grow and grow. These aren't just large snakes, they are giants, capable of growing over 20 feet long and weighing more than 200 pounds. They can dislocate their jaws to swallow prey many times wider than their own heads. They have been found with adult deer inside them. Shocking videos even began to surface showing pythons in head-to-head battles with American alligators, the original king of the swamp. Sometimes the alligator won, sometimes the python won. In one famous case, a 13-foot python was found split open with a 6-foot alligator halfway down its gullet. The two predators had, in effect, eliminated each other. The python had taken the throne. What once symbolized Florida's wild beauty was now a battlefield, and the native wildlife was losing badly. The economic and ecological stakes went far beyond just the animals. The Everglades ecosystem supports tourism, fishing, and most importantly, provides fresh drinking water and flood control for millions of people in South Florida. Yet every year, the python threat grew. Researchers and hunters have managed to capture and remove over 23,000 snakes, but that's barely a drop in the bucket. It's estimated to be less than 1% of what's really out there. The rest remain unseen, breeding, spreading, and consuming. The swamp that once pulsed with life now echoed with absence. As officials searched for solutions, nothing seemed to work. The ecosystem was collapsing from within. Technology versus the serpent. At first, Florida's response to the python invasion looked like something from an action movie. Officials, facing a crisis they couldn't ignore, threw open the gates to anyone brave enough or crazy enough to help. In 2013, the state launched the Florida Python Challenge. It was part bounty hunt, part media spectacle. Hundreds of people from all over the country descended on the Everglades armed with hooks, traps, and nerves of steel, ready to do what policy had failed to do. By 2024, it had become a massive annual event. That year alone, 857 participants from across the United States and even Canada signed up. They waded through miles of swamp, capturing 195 Burmese pythons. Headlines were made. The winner, who bagged the most snakes, walked away with a $10,000 grand prize, hailed as a hero. For a brief moment, it felt like a victory. But here's the thing. The numbers were illusion. A year later, in 2025, the competition broke new records. The top hunter, Taylor Stanberry, caught an incredible 61 pythons by himself. In total, participants pulled 294 snakes from the wild. It sounded huge until you remember the estimates. They had removed 294 snakes from a population of potentially 300,000. The Everglades wasn't healing, it was just a backdrop for a PR event. The pythons were breeding faster than anyone could catch them. To put it mildly, the state knew this wasn't enough. They had to get serious. The South Florida Water Management District hired 24 elite professional hunters. These weren't weekend adventurers, they were paid hourly, year-round, to stalk the swamps. These contractors became incredibly good at their jobs, removing thousands of snakes. But even they admitted it was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. The snakes just kept coming. So Florida turned to high-tech warfare. If humans couldn't find them, maybe technology could. Engineers designed robotic rabbits that gave off heat and the scent of prey, trying to trick pythons into striking at a trap. Specialized dog teams were trained to sniff out the unique scent of a python's trail. Drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras hovered over the wetlands, scanning for the cold-blooded reptiles at night. One of the most clever and strangest experiments involved scout snakes, sometimes called Judas snakes. Researchers would capture a large male python, implant it with a tiny radio transmitter, and then release it back into the wild. The hope? During breeding season, this scout would lead them straight to a giant hidden female full of eggs. It was an ecological chess game, and humans were using every trick they knew. Yet the harder they fought, the more the snakes adapted. Since 2017, these combined efforts, the challenge, the contractors, the tech, have removed over 23,000 pythons. It's an astonishing number, a testament to human determination. But it's also a terrifying one, because as experts bleakly point out, that is likely less than 1% of the total population. The frustration was impossible to hide. Years of effort, millions of dollars in funding, and a long list of failed experiments all led to the same sober truth. The pythons weren't going anywhere. Scientists began to admit publicly what many had feared in private. Full eradication is impossible. These predators, native to Southeast Asia, had claimed the Everglades. The best anyone could do was control them, slow them down, and try to protect small, specific areas. Each failed attempt only deepened the sense of helplessness. The snakes slithered north, pushing into new habitats, ignoring the boundaries humans drew on maps. Every solution seemed to end at the same dead end. This growing sense of defeat pushed Florida to the edge. If money, manpower, and technology couldn't stop them, what could? But what many overlooked was that the pythons didn't come alone. They brought a secret, a silent passenger that was about to make the entire nightmare infinitely worse. A plague hiding in plain sight. What if Florida's biggest problem wasn't the 20-foot python, but something so small you could barely see it? Deep in the Everglades, a silent passenger arrived with the invaders, an unseen parasite that is now rewriting Florida's ecological horror story. Its name is Reintroducing orientalis, Rel-E-et-E-Ella or E-N-talis. It's better known as the snake lungworm. And while the pythons grab the headlines, this parasite is unleashing a whole new kind of chaos. It all started with a microscopic hitchhiker. This lungworm, a type of crustacean-like parasite called a pentastomid or tongue worm, originally came from Asia. It lived inside Burmese pythons, which had evolved with it for thousands of years and had immunities. But when those pythons were released in Florida, the parasite found a brand new, defenseless world. Here's how its deadly journey works. First, an infected python's droppings carry the worm's microscopic eggs into the swamp. Second, cockroaches or other small critters feed on that waste, ingesting the eggs. Third, native Florida lizards and frogs eat those roaches. The parasite doesn't harm them, it just waits inside, a living time bomb. Finally, a native Florida snake, like a pygmy rattlesnake or a black racer, comes along and eats that infected frog or lizard. Once inside the native snake's body, the larvae begin their grim work. They tunnel out of the stomach and migrate into the snake's lungs. For pythons, this is just a minor annoyance. For Florida's native snakes, who have zero natural defense, it's a catastrophe. The worms latch on and feed on blood and lung tissue, growing and reproducing, slowly choking the animal from the inside. Breathing becomes a painful struggle. The snakes lose energy, become lethargic, and can't hunt. Many simply starve to death. Researchers have found native snakes suffering from severe pneumonia with open infected lesions all over their lungs. In some of the worst cases, they've found snakes with dozens of these worms crawling out of their mouths, desperately trying to escape a body that is shutting down. It's a truly gruesome fate. The real shock came when scientists realized how fast and how far the lungworm had spread. To date, 18 different species of native Florida snakes have been found infected. And here's the most terrifying part: the parasite is no longer just in the Everglades. It has been found in snakes dozens, even hundreds of miles north, all the way up to Jacksonville and across toward the Panhandle. It's moving far beyond the python's main territory. You see, the parasite has jumped ship. It's now spreading on its own, moving from native snake to native snake, using Florida's own frogs and lizards as bridges. The pythons were just the delivery service. The plague is now self-sustaining. When native snakes perish, the whole balance collapses. Rodent populations can explode. Small predators that rely on those snakes for food lose their food source. These native snakes are the glue holding the smaller ecosystem together. They are pest control, prey, and predator all in one. Scientists now fear that even if every single python were magically removed tomorrow, the lungworm would remain. It's here, it's alive, and it's thriving in the very species that are supposed to be here. There is one bizarre, hopeful twist. The Florida cottonmouth, a native venomous viper, seems to be uniquely resistant to the parasite's worst effects. No one knows why. Is it something in its genetics, its diet, a natural immunity? It's one of the few positive mysteries in a grim picture. What began as a battle against a giant snake has morphed into something far more complex. An invisible invader is now spreading faster than the predator that brought it. There is no cure, no treatment, and no way to stop it. Human tech had failed. An invisible plague was spreading. Florida had one last, laughable idea left: the rebirth of the indigo. When the news broke, it sounded like a joke from a late-night show. Florida officials, the same people spending millions of dollars to capture, track, and remove invasive Burmese pythons, announced they were releasing hundreds of new snakes into the wild. The plan: to reintroduce the eastern indigo snake, a native, non-venomous species, to help fight the state's invasive animal crisis. The reaction was immediate and brutal. The world laughed. Social media exploded with memes and disbelief. "Doesn't Florida have enough snakes?" one comment read. "Fighting snakes with more snakes? What could possibly go wrong?" another posted. The public's memory, it turns out, is long. People immediately compared it to the infamous mongoose disaster in Hawaii. Back in the 1880s, Hawaii's sugarcane fields were being ravaged by rats. So landowners decided to import the small Indian mongoose, a famed snake and rat hunter. The problem? Nobody checked the mongoose's schedule. Rats are nocturnal, active at night. Mongooses are diurnal, active during the day. The two animals barely ever met. The rats continued to thrive, and the mongooses, with no natural predators, turned their attention to Hawaii's native ground-nesting birds, driving multiple species into extinction. It was one of the greatest ecological blunders in history. And now, Florida, the state already famous for bizarre wildlife stories, looked like it was repeating the same mistake. News outlets ran with the frenzy. Headlines made it sound like a B-movie plot. Florida's new weapon in Python war is another snake. Has the Sunshine State lost its mind? Talk shows used it as a punchline. To the average person, it felt completely, fundamentally absurd. Why would anyone think adding more serpents was the solution? Even some conservationists were nervous. The optics, to put it mildly, were not great. Florida had spent a decade telling the public that snakes were the enemy, that any large serpent was a threat. Now they were releasing them from the back of a truck? The contradiction made the plan an easy target for mockery. Wild theories began to circulate. What if this new snake, this indigo, was too effective? What if after it ate all the pythons, it just kept going, wiping out garter snakes, water snakes, black racers, every other serpent that belonged there? What if Florida was just trading one apex predator problem for another? The most terrifying theory, the one that haunted online forums, was hybridization. What if the 9-foot indigo, a powerful native, bred with the 20-foot Burmese python, an unstoppable invader? Could they create some kind of super snake? A hybrid monster immune to venom, capable of crushing an alligator and perfectly at home in the Florida suburbs. Biologically, it was nonsense. The two snakes are as different as a dog and a cat. But in the court of public opinion, the fear was real. But what many overlooked, buried beneath the laughter and the jokes, was that the eastern indigo snake wasn't the villain. It wasn't even a stranger. It was the missing hero. This wasn't just another snake, this was the Ophiophagus hana of North America, the snake eater. Locals called it the emperor of the forest. The eastern indigo snake is the longest native snake in North America, a powerful, graceful predator that can grow up to 9 feet long. Its scales aren't just black, they are a beautiful, iridescent blue-black that shimmers like polished obsidian in the sun. It's a truly majestic animal, and it has a very, very particular diet. The eastern indigo eats other snakes. This includes venomous snakes. You see, the indigo is immune to the venom of rattlesnakes, cottonmouths, and copperheads. It doesn't constrict its prey, it doesn't need to. It simply grabs them, overpowers them with its powerful jaws, and swallows them whole, sometimes while the other snake is still striking it in the face. It is a natural-born, cold-blooded snake hunter. What the public saw as a crazy new idea was, in fact, a decades-long restoration project. The eastern indigo, once common across the southeast, had nearly vanished from North Florida and Alabama. Its population wasn't destroyed by another animal, but by humans. Nearly 97% of its prime habitat, the ancient longleaf pine forest, had been destroyed by logging and development. These pine savannas were a unique ecosystem, and with them gone, the emperor had no kingdom. Worse, the snake suffered from its close relationship with the gopher tortoise. The gopher tortoise is a keystone species, meaning its existence supports the entire ecosystem. It digs deep, 30-foot-long burrows. These burrows aren't just homes, they are subterranean hotels, providing stable, cool shelter for over 350 other species, from frogs and mice to rabbits and even bobcats. For the eastern indigo, these burrows are essential. They are where it shelters, hunts, and survives the cold snaps of winter. But in the 20th century, rattlesnake hunters would cruise the forest looking for tortoise burrows. To get the valuable rattlesnakes out, they would pump gallons of gasoline down the holes. The fumes would drive the rattlesnakes out, but they would asphyxiate everything else trapped inside. The non-venomous, slow-moving indigos, hiding in the dark, didn't stand a chance. They were gassed in their own homes. Between the total loss of their forest and the poisoning of their tortoise-built shelters, the emperor was dethroned. By 1978, it was listed as a threatened species. So this wasn't a reckless gamble. It was a painstaking scientific effort to bring back a native apex predator that should have been there all along. For years, scientists at places like the Orion Center for Indigo Conservation had been quietly breeding indigos in captivity, raising them for years, restoring thousands of acres of longleaf pine habitat, and preparing for this very moment. They were trying to restore balance, not by adding something new, but by returning what was stolen. While the critics rolled their eyes and made their mongoose jokes, scientists saw a chance to reintroduce the one predator that truly belonged, the one animal that evolved over millennia to keep other snake populations in check. The laughter was loud, but the science was louder. The stage was set for a showdown. But the first real sign that the war was turning, the first tremor of an earthquake, didn't come from the indigo. It came from a completely unexpected direction. The Everglades fights back. For nearly 20 years, the Burmese python ruled the Everglades with an iron fist. The invasion was silent, total, and absolute. The swamp itself, once a noisy, chaotic symphony of life, had fallen eerily quiet. The rustling in the underbrush was gone. The nocturnal chittering of mammals had ceased. This wasn't just a feeling, it was a statistical fact, a brutal mathematical equation of loss. Groundbreaking studies painted a picture so grim it was hard to believe. In the python's core range, the heart of its new empire, populations of raccoons and opossums hadn't just declined, they had dropped by over 99%. They were functionally extinct. Bobcats, once the swamp's stealthy mid-level predators, were gone. Foxes vanished. The native mammals, the warm-blooded lifeblood of the ecosystem, had been all but wiped out. Every new survey, every study, every radio collar track painted the same grim, relentless picture. The invader had won. The food web wasn't just damaged, it was shattered. The chain was broken. Tourists who came expecting a wild, vibrant paradise found a postcard-perfect graveyard. A beautiful green world populated only by birds, alligators, and the massive silent snakes that had eaten everything else. The battle, it seemed, was over. Then, one cold December morning, the story took a stunning, brutal, and completely unexpected turn. Researchers in the field were tracking a 13-foot, 52-pound male python they had affectionately named Loki. This was no small snake. This was a monster thick as a powerlifter's thigh, an apex predator in its prime. Loki was fitted with a GPS tracker, and for days the scientists had watched his signal beep, beep, beep across their maps. They assumed he was on the move, likely heading toward a Judas snake, a female python used by researchers to lure in males during breeding season. But then the signal stopped. It didn't just stop, it went cold, motionless in a patch of dense grass. The research team moved in expecting to find Loki coiled up digesting a meal. What they found instead left them speechless. Loki's massive muscular body was sprawled in the grass, but something was terribly wrong. His head, the most vital part of a predator, was gone. It hadn't just been bitten, it had been completely chewed off, severed, and dragged away. What in the Everglades could do this? The scene was baffling. The first obvious suspect was a full-grown alligator. A gator was the only other creature in the swamp with the raw power to take on a python of this size. But the evidence didn't fit. The body wasn't torn or twisted. There were no signs of the classic death roll that alligators use to dismember prey. The elimination was clean. Too clean. A few days later, a trail camera set up near the site revealed the impossible culprit. It wasn't an alligator, it wasn't a bear, it was a native bobcat. A creature weighing maybe 20-25 pounds at most had managed to stalk, ambush, eliminate, and destroy an apex predator more than twice its size. The wow factor, as the researchers put it, was undeniable. The discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community. This wasn't just a curiosity, it was a world first. It was the first documented case of a bobcat in Florida successfully hunting and consuming an adult Burmese python. For 2 decades, the script had been written in stone. Pythons were the hunters. They were famous for eating bobcats, deer, and even alligators. The idea of the reverse happening was laughable. Now, suddenly, in a single bloody encounter, one of Florida's own had turned the tables. The hunted had become the hunter. This singular event ripped open the narrative. The initial theory was simple. The cold weather. The December chill had likely made the cold-blooded python slow, sluggish, and vulnerable. The bobcat, warm-blooded and opportunistic, had simply seized an easy meal. But others suggested something far more profound was happening. They suggested the bobcat had learned. It had adapted. It recognized a new, abundant, and dangerous food source, and it had figured out through trial and error how to hunt it. And this sparked a terrifying new question. Could it pass that new, dangerous piece of knowledge on? Was this a one-time event, or was this the start of a new generational skill set? Were bobcat mothers now teaching their kittens, this is the monster? This is how you eliminate it? The data suggested the impossible. The native animals weren't just running, they were adapting, they were fighting back. This single discovery opened the floodgates to a whole new set of wild, speculative theories. Not about hybrid monsters, but about adaptation. Could nature be staging a resistance? One theory, rooted in the fantastic realm of speculative science, was the idea of epigenetic warfare. The idea is that the intense, decades-long pressure from this new super predator was acting like a key, switching on dormant ancient genes in Florida's native animals. Think of it like this. The bobcat's DNA wasn't changing, but ancient, dusty blueprints buried deep inside their genetic code were suddenly being unlocked. Genes for aggression, genes for faster reflexes, genes that screamed fight instead of flight. The theory proposed that the sheer, overwhelming stress of the invasion was recoding the bobcats, making them faster, more aggressive, and more likely to see a giant snake not as a world-ending threat, but as a challenge. Nature, in short, was rewriting its own code to fight the monster it had been given. It was upgrading its soldiers in real time. And the thing is, this wasn't an isolated story. The bobcat wasn't alone. Across Florida, more and more evidence started to pop up, showing nature adapting on all fronts. Alligators, which had often lost battles to giant pythons in the past, were now being frequently spotted consuming smaller pythons. The gators, it seemed, had finally figured out how to win. The old tactic, bite, hold, and crush, was a losing strategy against a constrictor. The python would just wrap them up. So the gators changed their playbook. The new strategy, strike fast, drag the snake into the water, and immediately initiate the death roll. They weren't trying to crush the snake, they were trying to drown it and dismember it before the python could ever establish its deadly coils. Even the elusive and critically endangered Florida panther, the ghost of the swamp, a creature researchers were desperate to protect, was documented taking on the invaders. The home team was finally learning the enemy's weaknesses. And then came the final, most chilling theory of all, a python civil war. With the raccoons, rabbits, and foxes all but gone from the menu, what was the massive 300,000-strong army of pythons supposed to eat? An army needs rations, and the Everglades pantry was bare. The answer, researchers began to realize, was each other. Reports of python cannibalism started to surface. The giant invaders, having eaten the swamp clean, were now turning on themselves. The monster, in its all-consuming and desperate hunger, had finally begun to eat itself. This was the chaotic new world the eastern indigo snake was released into. A world where the natives were learning to be warriors and the invaders were turning on each other in a desperate, cannibalistic free-for-all. And then, the moment everyone was waiting for. Trail cameras set up to monitor the newly released eastern indigo snakes captured what was once only a theory. Footage emerged showing the emperor doing what it does best. The sleek, 9-foot blue-black snake, confident and bold, was seen hunting and consuming a young Burmese python. The very plan everyone had laughed at, the mongoose disaster in the making, was working. The fight wasn't a brutal, messy brawl. The indigo snake, a specialist snake hunter, was casual, confident, and immune to the python's venom. It hunted the young invader with the effortless skill of a creature that knows it's the rightful boss of the swamp. The king had returned, and it was taking back its kingdom one invader at a time. For the first time in 20 years, Florida's native predators were learning to challenge the newcomers. It was a score for the home team. The Everglades were, at last, fighting back. Now, people watching this are probably wondering, did this all happen overnight? Is this the end of the python problem? To put it mildly, no. A few dozen bobcats and a few hundred indigo snakes cannot undo 2 decades of relentless destruction. They can't eliminate an army of 300,000, an army that breeds faster and grows larger than anything else in the swamp. But that was never the real point. The real miracle, the truth that hit so hard it changed everything, came in the autumn of 2023. At a preserve in North Florida, remote cameras captured 2 tiny wild-born hatchlings of the eastern indigo snake. Was Florida's crazy snake plan genius, or did they just get lucky? Tell us your thoughts below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.